Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to InventoryBase Academy and to today's webinar on maintenance. Just waiting for some more people to join, so I'm just going to give it a few more minutes. If I could ask anybody just to let me know that you can hear me okay. There's a chat box to the lower right, depending on how your screen's configured. You can just say hi, let me know you're there, that would be helpful. We can see we've got a few attendees already logged on, but if someone could just let me know, can you hear me okay? Lovely, loud and clear. Alex, hi Alex. Hi Lee, hi Samantha. Hello Deborah. Hello Paul. Oh, thank you Anthony. Can hear you, can see you rather than hear you. Nice of you to join us, David and Michael, Michelle, Claire. Thank you. Oh, great, Andrew. Andrew, thanks for letting me know that you can hear me okay. That's really helpful. And Georgina, hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Hello Samantha, Phil, Paul, Claire, Lucy. Brilliant. Let's give it literally a minute or two more just to let everybody else log on and then we can start. Right, I think everybody has joined. A couple more people still joined, so that's absolutely fine. We're recording this anyway, so that's absolutely fine. And a copy of this will go out once we finish the webinar today. So, today's webinar, maintenance versus negligence. It's a huge topic, certainly from a point of view of practicing clerk, as I am, and I know most of you are, but it's actually quite a simple one as well as, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the webinar, just so that we can just, you know, make it easy to understand and make it easy for us as clerks to be able to manage it, and also for the letting agents to manage obviously any issues that come from either the checkout report or the interim report if things aren't maybe going so well. So it's just to kind of like, you know, put it into perspective in regards to what it actually means and how you can then determine the difference. So first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. It's a lot there. Obviously, I'm very much well aware of the lockdown and the rules, and most of you will be at home, I hope, and safe, but more importantly. But I would like to try and keep this light, but also to around about 40 minutes. So that, you know, if you do have other things to be doing, you can get on with those. And we said we are recording this webinar, so you will be able to go back to it to refresh your memory, or if you've not been able to stay for the whole session, then that's absolutely fine. There is a chat box which you should see on your screen, so do feel free to ask any questions, and I'll try and get to them as we're going along, bearing in mind, obviously, again, trying to keep to the 40 minutes. If I don't answer them, please don't worry, the system will capture that. We'll then answer that when we send out the copy of the recording later on. So again, do feel free to put your questions through to me. So, maintenance versus negligence. How do you determine the difference between maintenance, tenant responsibility, and landlord negligence? So we've got to look at responsibilities initially. So your landlord is responsible for most repairs in the home. most people are aware of that, but this applies to private landlords, to councils and housing associations. Just because you're a housing association doesn't mean that you're not applicable to being responsible towards the property, towards your tenants. Some people seem to think that because you're a housing association that you aren't liable for or responsible for the property, but you certainly are. The responsibilities include repairs to electrical wiring, gas pipes and boilers, so you would expect that to be part and parcel of your normal gas safety certificate if there's gas at the property, your heating and your hot water, any chimneys and ventilation that the property has, also sink, baths, toilets, pipes and drains, anything that forms part and parcel of the water and ability to clean, wash and cook in the property, that's all included. One of the issues around common areas is a lot of landlords don't seem to think that that applies to them, especially when it comes to flats, because most landlords think that as you get to the front of the door, the property, the flat, that all the other areas are either just down to the managing agent. But there has been cases where a landlord has actually been taken to court because they haven't either maintained or been part of the maintenance to the block that their flat exists in. So that's something that people should be aware of, but also look into from a point of view, what have you got in regards to your agreement with the block management or whoever is managing that property, so that everybody's aware of where the responsibilities are, because a tenant could trip up going into the property or outside on one of the paving stones if it's raised, or if the areas aren't cleaned and maintained, maybe there's a pest problem. So again, those common areas are all part and parcel of the responsibility, both to the landlord and also anybody the landlord uses, i.e. the managing agent for the block, to make sure that that property is looked after and well maintained. Oh, sorry, a bit too quick there. Also the structure of the building, including walls, stairs and banisters, roofs, external doors and windows, as you would expect. So most people, when we're looking at inventories, we will comment on the outside of the property, the gardens, the driveway, possibly the outer fabric of the property if there's something or there's an issue rather, such as pipework, drainage, where it may be overflowing that could cause problems. It's blocked, or there's a lot of damage on the outside of the property. But most of the time, the tenants are actually responsible for what's in the property as from the door inwards. But yes, certainly from a point of view of a garden, they're responsible, but the landlord is ultimately responsible for that structure, for that exterior of the property. And landlords have a health and safety, landlords are obliged to follow health and safety, and they have a health and safety, I'm losing my words here now, obligation to tenants to make sure that the property is safe and free from hazards. And this is where Fit for Human Habitation comes into play. As we all know, in 2019, Fitness for Human Habitation was enacted. And certain properties and tenancies were only included at that point that were going to be going forward from 2019, from I think March 2019, whereas now from March 2020 that includes all properties, but there is an exception in regards to, I'm sorry, I'll just touch that again, into fixed tenancies that were started before that date. But it basically means that landlords are responsible for making sure that the property is fit to be used as a property that is fit for the tenant to be able to live in the property and everything that goes with it in regards to sanitation, being able to cook, being able to clean, being able to be comfortable, be warm, and also be able to ventilate. So certainly, like we have at the moment, really nice weather, you can open the windows, that they're not barred, that their openings can be used, there's locks, there's an ability to ventilate the property, and certainly that's important from a mould point of view, because if tenants can't open windows and doors safely, there's an exit, a safety issue from that point of view, but equally there's an issue from condensation, potential mould and ventilation. So again, the landlord is responsible for making sure that that property is habitable and safe for that tenant to be able to live there and be able to wash and clean and do all the basics you would expect in any kind of home. But the tenant also has a responsibility. My problem with tenant responsibility and using the home in a tenant-like manner, it is very subjective. It's very difficult to understand exactly what that is because everybody treats their homes differently. For argument's sake, what I would call clean, what someone else would call clean would be different. How you use the home in regards to how you manage on a day-to-day basis. I like to clean as I go along. Other people tend to clean maybe once a week, or they might even get cleaners in. Other people may feel that they don't need to do that and they would maybe clean a couple of weeks down the line. Everybody's different. So I find with the tenant responsibility bullet points, it said it is subjective, and keeping the home reasonably clean is very much down to the individual person as to what they think about that. Certainly interim reports help understand from a clerk, from an agent and landlord point of view, exactly how that property is being managed. And you would expect, a level of day-to-day where, washing up maybe not done, washing waiting to go on, floors maybe not be swept, etc. But if at an interim you're going in and you're finding that you can't even walk on the floor, or the property is in very bad order, maybe it's not being ventilated, maybe there's loads of mold issues on the walls because clothing is being dried within the property, it means then that I would argue that the home isn't being looked after in a tenant-like manner, is not necessarily reasonably clean. So it very much is down to interpretation as to how you decide whether that the condition of the property is acceptable or not. Sometimes that's landlord-led. Landlords will let you know what is acceptable, what they'll accept or not, and also from the agent point of view, but also from inventory clerk point of view, it's about our experience. We understand because we're going into properties all the time, and we can see the difference in the property as to how it's looked after, as to whether the property is being looked after in a tenant-like manner and is being kept reasonably clean. Now, one thing that I actually didn't know, and I had to put my hands up on this, about safety checks on electrical appliances owned by the tenant. We're all aware, I'm no doubt sure, that any electrical appliances provided by the landlord should be PAT tested, should be portable appliance test labelled and tested to make sure that it's safe to use. But I actually didn't appreciate the fact that safety checks on the tenant's items equally apply. And I suppose it makes sense because if they're plugging it into the socket and maybe the item is then that they're using is maybe not safe, a bit damaged, and could actually cause a problem to the socket and then cause a problem to the electrical system. So it's something to be aware of, but I can honestly say that I've never actually seen a tenant PAT test their own items as part and parcel of their tenancy. I don't know if anybody else has. It'd be interesting to see if anybody else has seen portable appliance test labels on any tenant-owned items, but I've certainly seen it on landlord-owned items. So that's an interesting point that I, as I was researching for this webinar, have come across. Keeping gardens or outside areas in a reasonable condition, again, very, very subjective. Some tenants are very, very particular about the gardens they maintain. They keep the property in very, very good order. Sometimes we will see properties coming back in much better order than it was when we did the original inventory or check-in. Not always the case, but I do see it quite a lot. But again, maintaining the gardens, what people think is acceptable is again, it's very subjective. I would argue though, if a tenant has got a pet and maybe the pet is soiling the paving areas or any areas around the property and not cleaning up after them, that is not reasonable. That is not keeping those outside areas in a reasonable condition. Similarly, rubbish. All properties, and also as part and parcel of fitness of human habitation, you're supposed to, i.e. landlords, provide adequate bins and food waste bins so that the tenant can live at the property, be comfortable, dispose of their waste responsibly, and also keep any potential pests at bay. And again, in the majority, certainly from my point of view, I see most people are using those bins, taking care of the outside areas, making sure everything is clean. That isn't always the case. One of the indicators, apart from obviously the pet side of things, is just said overflowing rubbish, potentially a pest problem, maybe a rat problem if that's been reported. And also you can glean a lot from the neighbours. Sometimes I find neighbours will actually come up to me as I'm going into a property asking me what I'm doing there. That's a normal thing. And then they'll kind of tell me what's been happening with the property and the tenancy. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's not. You've got to be careful and and how you apply that information to your report, but equally it can be quite important and useful. So it's always worthwhile capturing that information in your report, but not necessarily relying on it as being fact. And certainly from my point of view, and most inventory clerks I speak to, is that exactly is where we should be focusing our report based on fact, based on evidence, what we can see, what we can know, what we can actually showcase potentially to either the landlord, the agent, or adjudicator, if it goes to dispute. So minor maintenance such as changing light bulbs and batteries in smoke alarms, yes, definitely down to the tenant. It's something I certainly make sure that the tenant is aware of at point of check-in. Certainly in regards to batteries for inventories, inventories, smoke alarms. I've got inventories on the brain today. Smoke alarms, unless they're the fixed units, i.e. the lithium batteries that are closed in, and then that would be something for the landlord to manage. But then the tenant has got a responsibility to let someone know, let the landlord know, let the agent know the alarm's not working. Can you please sort that out? Equally, when it comes to interim reports, when we're going in as clerks to check on the property, we should be checking those and making sure that they are being tested by the tenant at least once every 2 weeks, in my opinion. And also making sure that they've either changed the batteries or that the item is going to be changed if it's not working, if it's a closed-in unit. And maintaining your home to a reasonable level, and again, that's very, very subjective, but again, you'd expect tenants to live in a home. That's the whole point. Not every home is tidy. If you were to see the desk I'm working on at the moment, normally it's very, very tidy. Today it's got books and all loads of pads and pens and items all over the place where I've been working this morning. But someone walked in, they might see that as messy, but I know for a fact that later on I'll clear that up. So it's about keeping, looking at it, but also looking at it from a point of view, well, people have got to live in a property. There's liable to be mess, but doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be tidied up. So it's about using your experience, using your common sense on this. And obviously from the reporting and repairs point of view, there's loads of systems and mechanisms in place now, certainly via fixed flow, if your agent uses that, or via direct contact with the landlord or the agent for noting any repairs. And certainly something we pick up on interim visit when we say to tenants, what's happening with this repair, or, the tenant says, I've reported that repair hasn't been done, can you make a note of it? So that is definitely within the realms of the tenant's responsibility to make sure that they tell the landlord, they tell the agent, or to tell you as the clerk that these are the issues and that something's got to be done or needs to be done, or this is how they're managing things. Because one thing that does come up sometimes, not all, but sometimes, is that tenants, depending on their mental health, maybe not coping so well and maybe are not maintaining the property, not because they don't want to, it's just because maybe they physically can't, or they're just having issues where they just physically are unable to look after the property. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not trying. It may mean that there are other issues, and it's something to be aware of, and don't look at it from a clerk point of view that it's either they're not maintaining it or they are. There could be other issues. So it's always a good opportunity, certainly during an interim visit, to see how everything is. And one of the first things I always say to the tenants when I walk in is go, hi, how are you? How's things? Sometimes they say something to me, sometimes they won't. I'm not there to judge, I'm there to capture the information, but equally if I can help the landlord and the agent understand what it is that's happening with that particular property, then they can manage any issues, etc., going forward much more sensitively, but also robustly as well. So it could be that that they're perfectly capable of looking after the property, they just choose not to. Some people do that, and it's a way of conveying that through to the landlord and letting agent. But you just got to be aware there is there's potential different facets to anything that you see, and it's about making sure that you're looking at it correctly and making sure you're applying your common sense and providing the facts so that then the agent, the landlord, can make an informed decision as to what maybe needs to happen there afterwards. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Right. So I thought this was an interesting figure to show everybody. Normally, when we get to checkout, in most of the cases, we don't go to dispute, or if there is a problem, it normally gets resolved. And it was interesting to see that in 2008, so I just lost my screen there a minute, 2008, 458 adjudications were dealt by all the deposit schemes. But 2019, you can see the jump, 35,513 adjudications by all deposit schemes were recorded. You can get these statistics from the TDS statistical briefing 2018-19, as you can see down the bottom, or if not, we can include a link for you when we send out the webinar recording. I just thought that was really interesting to see the big jump. Now, there could be quite a few reasons as to why that is. Obviously, deposit schemes from when they started out, and also technology and where we are now and what we understand, and levels of standards of training, etc., have all changed during that period. Plus, also, we've increased our rental capacity, i.e. how many people are actually renting is now the norm rather than the exception. That's through choice or through other factors. So it's probably inevitable that we would see an increase in adjudications, but that's quite a stark increase. But to then put that, or put those figures into context, the reasons for disputes are quite interesting. So you can see there, so out of that percentages, 45% are cleaning, 38% damage, 28% redecoration, and 10% gardening. Now, they can only get these statistics obviously through the adjudications and what they're hearing, and obviously the disputes. But it's interesting that the fact that it always seems to be the same two headers, i.e. cleaning and damage, are the main causes going for dispute, either because the landlord's taking a dispute or the tenant are disputing the costs that the landlord's trying to take from the deposit. So I think that's quite interesting, but equally interesting is the 28% for redecoration. I'm personally, from a clerk point of view, seeing much more redecoration issues where a tenant has redecorated and maybe not got permission, and it's certainly something we ask at checkouts if we see a difference. And that's why it's so important to have a really detailed inventory, and you're noticing things like colours of walls and skirting and doors, etc., because without that at the beginning, you won't know at the end whether a change has occurred, and if a change has occurred, whether permission's been given or not. I dealt with a property yesterday where the redecoration has actually been done to a really, really good standard, to the point where the landlord's getting the property back in much better condition than when it was let out, which certainly from a clerk point of view, it's great because there was less writing to do. It was quite good from that point of view. But equally, I see it from the other side where decoration isn't great. It's, you know, someone's painted a wall they've not cut in, the paint's all over the place, or patch it, it's definitely going to need redecoration, and obviously there's going to be a cost apportioned to that. So it's interesting to see that yes, cleaning is quite high, damage quite high, but redecoration also features there. Gardens at 10% are still relatively low, but what I do find, certainly from a point of view of inventories, and certainly inventories I look at from a training point of view, is that a lot of the time gardens aren't necessarily captured in the same way as you would do a room, i.e. there's just no detail. There's a couple of pictures, a couple of bit of words, and that's it. My view is they should be treated the same as a room, in as much as that, you know, you do the same level of detail, because come checkout, if there are changes and you haven't even made those notes, and you haven't got that detail, or you haven't got the pictures, you're not going to really know whether there's been a huge change, and then what's made that change occur, and also whether then there's potentially going to be a dispute over it, i.e. you've got an immaculate garden at the beginning, and you've got to get the property back in not so good order, and there's a lot of work potentially needs to be done, landlord wants to claim for it, if you don't have the evidence, you're not going to be able to take that to adjudicator to give them the ability to make an informed decision. So yes, 10% is low, but equally I would say it's just as important. So there's the reasons for dispute. Another interesting fact though, out of all of those, only 1% of all disputes that go towards the adjudication process right across all the schemes actually results in cases actually being seen. So out of all of those 35,000 odd adjudication, so all the deposits held, only 1% actually goes to adjudication, which is a very, very low number. So I had people say to me, well, then what's the point? Why are we bothering doing reports if that number is so low? My argument is, well, I think it's so low is because we do the report, because we're giving the landlord, the agent and the tenant, to be fair, it's not all one-sided, it goes both ways in regards to issues, but we're giving them the ability to understand the property, to make informed choices and give them the evidence about what we're seeing about the condition of the property. And then if they've got all of that, a lot of the time it doesn't need to go to dispute. So I think the fact that the figure is low is in a way good, but it does mean also I think that it showcases we're doing our job well. If we were getting poor quality reports, I think you could argue that that percentage could potentially be higher. So, but I just thought that was an interesting fact for you. So, difference between maintenance and negligence. Now, it's a difficult one to say because it's very much down to what the issue is as to whose fault it is, if there is a fault, or whether there actually needs to be just, you know, common garden maintenance done. So I thought it'd be better to do it in a picture format. And with that, I would really appreciate your thoughts on this. You know, put your messages on the chat box and let me know what you think each of these pictures are. So, is that maintenance or negligence? Whose fault do you think that would be in regards to the tenant, the landlord, if you were coming across that in a property, either at, say, at checkout? Who do you think that would be the fault of? I'm looking at a few questions. So we've got maintenance from Michael. Oh, Michael, I said you've lost your back again. Thank you. So you got maintenance, tenant from Samantha, landlord potentially tenant if, or let's expand this box out a little bit so I can see your answers, because it's not letting me do that. Sorry about that. So it depends on what the reason is. If the socket is cracked already, from Georgina. I'm just trying to expand my screen, and for some reason it's not letting me do it. It's been very awkward. Oh, there we go. Right, I've managed it now. Me and technology are not too bad, but sometimes I just don't even know what I'm doing. So excuse me for that. So, right. So Alex says landlord potentially, tenant if not reported. Yep. Depends on what was recorded at check-in from Phil. Yep, quite right. Georgina, if the socket's cracked, so an impact to tenant charge. Phil, again, could have been an extent issue at check-in. Could have been an extent issue. I'm not quite sure what you mean about that, but I'm presuming that could have been something that was already pre-existing at check-in. Could become loose, could be a landlord, and it's not clear. And that's a really good one, Anthony. It is not clear. This is the problem we have with reports in regards to the detail that we have both at the inventory and at the checkout. If it's not recorded, if this was recorded at inventory, then it's clear it's the landlord and it's responsibility of the landlords, because clearly that is not safe. However, if it's at checkout, then, and it wasn't recorded at inventory, no note was recorded, then you would say that's tenant. But then the problem then we then get is if at inventory we haven't noted the type of socket, how many they are per room, the tenant could quite rightly say, well, it was like that beginning, and because we don't have that detail at the beginning of the inventory, we've got really a hard job to try and then apportion that to the tenant going forward, because it could have been loose, it could have been existing like that, and unless we kind of record how many sockets we've got, whether they, if there's any issues. You wouldn't necessarily say, or you could say there's no issues, or you could describe the socket and say all good, or all good working order, or not, as the case may be. We don't test sockets, but you could say something like that. And obviously at checkout, if you're then presented with this, then it's clearly a potential tenant issue. However, it could also be, like someone's already said to me, that there's an issue with regards to how it's fixed, and it could have been just the fact that tenants used it and it's come away from the wall. It's nothing to do with them, but then I would expect the tenant to report that. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. And the reason for highlighting this is to showcase the fact that it's not always that clear. So the key thing for HIT, from my point of view, is having that inventory detailed at the beginning, equally same at checkout, and asking the questions from the tenant. So you've got that one. Let's go to the next one. So you've got scuff on a wall. Is that maintenance or negligence? What would you say? Yeah, Alex, depends when painted. Samantha saying maintenance, yeah. Very good point, Alex. It's about lifespan, where fair wear and tear feel, yeah. Lee, again, maintenance. Negligence, Michael, okay. Depends on the length of tenancy. Yeah, I agree with that. When you look at it, yeah, wear and tear, thank you, Georgina. When you look at it, there's some scuffs, there's some marks. If you look at fair wear and tear as denoted by the government, you know, it's about the normal wear and tear you would expect to find in a tenancy for someone living at the property. And like you were saying, Georgina, it's by the front door where there's most traffic. So you would expect some marks. You could argue that, yes, there's some marks, but then they could easily be washed off or washed down by the tenant at the checkout. But I wouldn't necessarily say they're excessive. I think it's fair wear and tear from my point of view. I don't think there's necessarily negligence because of the marks. If we were talking great chunks out the corner of the wall, you could argue that. But then also, the other thing that I try and point out to people when I'm training is that if there's no doorstop by the door, and say from that picture the door opens inwards, you've potentially got an issue if the edge of that wall was damaged, because there's no doorstops preventing the door from keeping away from that wall, from that skirting. So I always say whether a doorstop is present or not, because then that helps the person reading the report, be it the agent, be it the tenant, landlord, understand that there's potential there for that wall, that corner to get damaged if there's no doorstop preventing that door from swinging right the way open. And I think it's important to know that we don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but it's a potential. So by saying whether there's a doorstop or not, you're kind of indicating, well, there's potential there for something to happen to that area if it's not correctly protected. But certainly in this instance, from a marks point of view, from the scuffs, little grubby marks there, for me, that's very much fair wear and tear, and it could easily be cleaned down depending on where you are in the tenancy. Cute doggy. What do you feel about this picture? Is that maintenance? Is that negligence? Whose fault is this? Lucy's saying that's damage. Yeah. Negligence from Lee. Yeah. Tenant liability from Andrew. Thank you. Alex pointed out, yeah, if not damaged at check-in, then that's the tenant. Good point, good point. David saying about tenant damage could be negligent. Again, Georgina, tenant damage, tenant charge, depending on what that is. Good point, Jay. Is the puppy the tenant's? Who does that belong to? And Anthony saying, again, negligence. Again, very subjective. Whose property is that seat that the lovely looking puppy is sat on? Is it the landlord's? Is the puppy allowed at the property? No, Michael Emmett, don't shoot the dog. That's no. That's a definite no. It's too cute, way too cute. And I'm a cat person, even I couldn't do that. Yeah, is that chair the landlord's property? Is that pet allowed? or is that the tenant's property? Again, by making sure that you've got a fully detailed inventory report at point of check-in, you're going to know. So if the property is not furnished, then that's an easy answer. If the property is furnished, then you've got to make sure that you look through your report to make sure that whether that chair is actually part and parcel of the landlord's property, and if so, then yes, that is tenant's damage, that's tenant negligence, because they're the one with the dog, they're the one that should be looking after the furniture, and therefore I think that case from that point of view is proven. However, you've got to prove that, you've got to showcase that, and by having that detailed report at the very, very beginning, you'll be able to easily and quickly see where that apportion for liability should lie, i.e. the tenant or the landlord, if it was actually given over to the tenant as part of the property, as part of the tenancy at the beginning. Again, we don't know, but they're the kind of points to consider. Gardens, my favourite, as this is what we were talking about earlier on. So again, would you say that if the property, say for argument's sake, and originally that it was really well ordered, is that a problem for the tenant? Should they be managing that? Is it their, or should liability be apportioned to them for the state of that garden? Alex, you said a pretty expensive problem for the tenant. Are you referring to the garden, I'm presuming, because that's quite a big garden and the shed looks in quite a bad state. I think actually, no, that's more like a greenhouse, isn't it? Yeah, Lee says this garden was in good seasonal order, then yes, this is down to the tenant. And this is what I was alluding to in the stats, into the adjudication stats, as to the fact that there's still 10% of adjudications that go forward because of gardening, i.e. that tenants aren't looking after it. David says tenant liability for garden if tidy at check-in. Yep. Depends on what was recorded at inventory. Again, good point, Phil. Tenant photos are really important for gardens. Absolutely, Michael. Totally agree with you. You need to, as I said to you earlier, treat the garden the same as you would treat a room in the property. It's exactly the same. So you need your minimum garden pictures. You need to be showcasing each item, like for argument's sake, you can see the greenhouse there. If the greenhouse was in that kind of condition at the very beginning, then it's clear that this is just how it is. And I find a lot, especially in older properties, where the gardens are just not maintained. So of course, then it'd be very difficult, and it wouldn't be fair on the tenant to expect them to maintain that. However, like it was said earlier, if the garden was in good seasonal order, like Lee said, then of course then you would expect the tenant to maintain that. And again, you'd be then asking, well, why haven't they maintained that? Landlords have a responsibility to make sure that they provide adequate equipment for tenant to look after the garden, i.e. a lawnmower, garden equipment. But I've never actually seen a specific list of exactly what should that be included, because again it very much depends on what the garden is like, what kind of maintenance it needs, as to what kind of equipment you need. But I would argue that if you're given the property in good order, that the garden is tended and it's weed free and it's been cleaned, i.e. paving stones, patios, etc., then that's how it should be given back. But like Anthony says, this looks like long-term negligence. There's not enough info. So all you from an inventory clerk point of view can do is to showcase the garden, take as many pictures as possible. The InventoryBase app does not keep you to a set amount. You can add in as many as you want, and then state what you see, and then they can determine from the original inventory, or you can determine from the original inventory exactly where the changes are, whether it was pre-existing, it's like that, worse, better, and then be able to apportion liability. What about this picture? How do we feel about this? Whose responsibility would this be? Is it maintenance? Is it negligence? What is it? Yeah, I mean, it's cracking. It's not in good order. Could that be down to the landlord? If it's damp and not reported, then it's down to the tenant. Alex, yeah, I totally agree. And this is one of the reasons why tenants should really make sure that if they've got options like fixed flow, use that. Let landlords know, or certainly let them know interim. And this is another reason why I always say to tenants, make sure you keep copies of everything that you put forward, i.e. your emails, any notes you've made for conversations, keep all that as evidence. Requires investigation, could be damp, David. Yep, I totally agree. Maintenance for landlord, again from Anthony. Lucy says, looks like a problem with the walls for landlord maintenance. Let me just expand this out. As long as the tenant, I can't read that fully, Lucy, I'm sorry. But I think what you're alluding to is basically this is down to the landlord, of course, unless the tenant hasn't looked after the property and maybe it's something the tenant is doing. Yeah, exactly. So again, it showcases it's not actually totally clear, but I would argue that if you've got a property at the beginning of the tenancy that looks like this, then there's serious issues, and I would argue that maybe the landlord doesn't necessarily look after the property, and then there's the issue, will they look after the tenant? And equally, then there's no incentive for the tenant to actually look after the property themselves. So Michael's right, you've got to have further investigation and have a really good inventory and a check-in, and give the tenants the ability to say, you know, if there's any issues, anything that's been missed, so that this is very clear as you go forward and through the reporting life cycle as to where potential liability will stand at the end of the tenancy once you've done the checkout. What about mould? Mould is a very big issue for a number of reasons, in as much as that I know a lot of landlords feel that mould is totally down to the tenant. Tenant feels that it's very much down to the landlord and the state of the property and how good the damp course is. And I know with agents, when I speak to them, they feel it's very much down to tenant lifestyle, that they're not ventilating, etc. properly. So what would you say about this one? That's a real good point, Alex. Alex says, depends if condensation, but we are not experts. Totally agree with you. Absolutely, totally agree with you. Your disclaimer should say that we're not an expert in these sort of matters. It's down to the landlord and agent to get a properly qualified contractor in to decide on this. All we can do is report on what we can see. And obviously from this picture, you can see there is problems, damp down in that right corner by the radiator. Something clearly isn't right. Could that be the tenant? Could it be the property? We don't know, but we know it's there. But again, if we've got a detailed inventory and it wasn't there at the beginning and we're at interim level and it now is, clearly something's happening, clearly something needs to be investigated. Andrew says, yeah, investigated. It could be, is it an outside wall? Yeah, it's a really good point. Has the room been ventilated? Exactly. You know, there could be, if an outside wall, sorry, Deborah, I'm just reading what you're saying. If the room hasn't been ventilated, it may be in various areas, if it's an outside wall. And this is another reason for saying things like when you're doing your inventory about windows, do they open, do they close? If you're able to do that, do they have locks? Is there ventilation, which then goes towards the whole fitness of human habitation? You know, can the tenants ventilate? Can they get fresh air? Can they keep it warm when they need to? Can they keep it cool when they need to? Phil's saying, generally internally derived through lack of ventilation, more likely to be tenant damage. Yes, certainly if you see tenants drying their clothes in the property, not allowing the property to air, so condensation accumulates and then we get mould. So again, there's a lot of different potential options for who's to either, want of a better word, blame or liability needs to be apportioned to, but you need to investigate or at least have the detail in your report to be able to showcase that so that it can be given over to a professional, as said, to investigate further, because that is just not our role. It's not what we're there for. Right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to quickly go through a few of these. Here you can see, I think there's quite an obvious one in regards to leaking. It could be from upstairs or from a pipe in the property. It could be something the tenant's done. 9 times out of 10, certainly in flats, you find it's leaking from the above property to yours. So I would say this is definitely a maintenance issue for a landlord. If you disagree, feel free to say. Yeah. Okay, so I think most people are saying, yeah, that's probably right. But again, in case of just saying what it is, there's a leak there, but you would expect the tenant to make sure that they let the agent know about that. And obviously, if they haven't, then that is very much down to tenant liability, because of the fact that they should have told the landlord. The landlord could then have fixed it, and it could have meant that damage doesn't either increase or potentially occur in the first place. If it's literally leaking and you get straight onto it, then the damage is lessened. But you don't know that unless someone tells you. So the tenant's responsibility is let the landlord know. So we've got a garden here, maintenance or negligence. Now, normally I see this when you've got pet in the property. They're using the garden as their toilet. They're not maybe walked as much as they should do. Therefore, that could potentially be tenant responsibility if it wasn't pre-existing at inventory. No, it's definitely pet, Georgina. I know what you mean about burn marks, but no, that's definitely outside grass. So yeah. And you've got blame the dog again, charge a tenant. If there's a pet, it's negligent. Yeah, you would expect the tenant to deal with that and repair the lawn if that's what their pet's been doing. And this is another reason why it'd be very useful from an inventory clerk point of view if the agent tells us whether pets are going to be present at the property at check-in, so that we've got that understanding going forward. Because if we go into an interim and we saw this kind of damage to the garden, then obviously we'd be asking at that point, but it'd be helpful to know beforehand. But I know that's not always possible. What about the crack here? What are thoughts and feelings on that? Georgina, I just read your last comment about urine burns. Yeah, I got that. No worries. Yep, settlement, maintenance, landlord maintenance from Alex, Bichelle, from Georgina, Phil. Yep, landlord maintenance, structural. Yeah, I think we're in agreement there. Lucy, exactly the same, structural building issue. Yep, so totally down to the landlord. If I saw a crack similarly in a ceiling, then I have had a conversation before with other clerks, and I think maybe even with Anthony, funny enough, and I'm sure Anthony will tell me, that if you've got cracks in the ceiling, then if a tenant's maybe been using a loft access area and putting items upstairs in the loft that may be too heavy for the ceiling to weight there, and there's cracks appeared and there weren't cracks at inventory, then you could argue that actually that's down to the tenant. So, but I think certainly from the pop quiz, yes, Georgina, it is. But I think from this point of view, I think we can all agree that yes, this is definitely a landlord maintenance issue. So how do we feel about this? There's leaking from the radiator. Oh, sorry, Georgina just said, separate note, do you inspect the loft? Me personally, no, unless the stairs are fixed and it's safe to do so. If you've got one of those rickety ones there, you pull out the staircase from the loft and you balance it on the floor, and as you go up, it's bending and flexing as you go up. No, it's not safe. We're on our own. If we fall over, we injure ourselves. The likelihood of anybody noticing quickly enough if we're hurt is very limited. So if it's not safe, then no. Sometimes landlords will open up the hatch and secure the stairs, but if you don't feel safe, you don't do it. What I tend to do is say to the landlord, I'm happy to take the pictures from you, take the description, I'll put them in the report, but unless it's got a fixed staircase, no, I wouldn't be going up. Plus also, I don't think my insurance company would insure me for that. And I don't think my knees would take it either. No, Georgina, you're saying don't either. Yes, yeah, same. Right, Michael, you're saying landlord issue to be notified by the tenant. Again, really good point. Tenants need to let the landlord know if it's leaking. Let them know so there's no damage to the floor. They can fix the leak. Keep the property warm, because obviously if the radiators aren't working properly, then there's an issue there with regards to fitness for human habitation, but it's down to the tenant to let the landlord know. So again, the tenant needs to be told at the beginning, not necessarily by us, although I know we do it, but certainly from the agent, from the landlord, is exactly where their responsibilities lie. And then we've got this one, which is the broken glass. How do we feel about that? Are we talking tenant, landlord? Right, Georgina is saying it's impact, so definitely a tenant. Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, from my own personal perspective, I'm a tenant at the moment, and through choice, which is absolutely fine, but in a way it gives me a much better perspective, bearing in mind what I do, and I'm sure a lot of you potentially either are tenants, have been tenants, or have that appreciation. But I actually cut the grass once, and stone went flying straight into the glass, broke the glass. So yes, there you go, Georgina. Yeah, stone flicks out when the tenant cut the glass. Yeah, it was one of those things. It happened. So I spoke to the landlord, let them know, and we got it all sorted. And I have contents insurance because that's what I'm meant to do as a tenant. The landlord has building insurance, so they claimed on the building insurance. But I let the landlord know straight away. I paid for the difference at the beginning of the policy. The excess, there you go, I was trying to remember what that was. So it went through the insurance, but I paid for the excess because I felt that was right, because it was part and parcel of what I was doing, but then again I was maintaining the garden. So, but I think at the end of the day, if you're reasonable and you talk to the landlord about it, it can easily be resolved. It doesn't necessarily need to go further. And like you said, Georgina, it could be an insurance claim, a landlord to repair at tenant expense from Anthony. Yeah. So again, it's about being sensible and reasonable. This one is more about the fact that you can see someone doing some maintenance on the extractor hood, but sometimes tenants tend to take into their own hands the maintenance of the property. I'm always saying to tenants, don't do that. If there's a problem, let the landlord know. I know there's always a bit of a sticking point in regards to how many times you want to tell a landlord and you don't want to really bother them, or make it so that you're seen as a problem tenant. But I would also argue that it's it's in the interest of both the tenant and landlord to let them know, don't try and take on maintenance yourself, because if you break it, then you are responsible, the tenant's responsible. Whereas if the landlord then deals with it, then it's down to the landlord. So that one's more of less about responsibility, more about thinking about what you're doing. So I'm hoping you'll found those slides useful, and certainly I think we're all in agreement as to how each one of those could be looked at, and it's also why it's so important to make sure that we've got all the facts. And this is why this slide we talk about about sticking to the facts, that all the reports should be based on facts and not opinions. So we're showcasing the evidence, and that could be photographic, could be video. Video is supported depending on your account with InventoryBase. So if you want to take video evidence, you can do that, but certainly photographic, you can take as many pictures as you want, but you need to showcase the evidence. And what I keep saying to people when I'm training, certainly clerks, sometimes agents, and certainly my own clerks as well, I say to them, your written word is your important part of the report. Your pictures are what then back up that evidence, what you're saying. It shouldn't be the other way around. And you can build trust by the quality of your reports and how you manage your service, by giving the right kind of information through how you provide your service, what you're telling, the advice you give. And I'm always saying to clerks is that you're an invaluable resource, you're invaluable in regards to your knowledge and your skills and your expertise, because you're going into properties, you're seeing these issues time and time and time again. So you're building up that knowledge base. So, agents should be relying on you to, ask your opinion, but based on fact, based on what you understand, what you've seen, and what you know to be true. And by doing that, your service will then be invaluable, and you're building that trust, because it's all about your quality, it's all about your service. So the more you learn, the more you understand, the better your service will be. And I don't just mean, InventoryBase Academy. Yes, I'm trying to help people learn as much as possible, but there's such a wealth of information out there at the moment that there's so much information you can find yourself. Look at things like AIIC, look at ALA, look at government information and resources, look at the deposit schemes, look at the case studies. They've all got things that I think they could do better, but there's a lot of information there. And I think the more up to date and more up to speed you are, the better your service will be, and the more your clients will come to rely on you, which means that they will stay with you. And that's what you want. You want to build trust, you want to build resilience, both in your business and also with your client as well. So as I say, stick to the facts always, showcase your evidence and build that trust with those clients. So that is today's webinar. Thank you so much indeed for spending your valuable time with me, because I do appreciate it. It is absolutely lovely out there. Obviously, in the current climate, I want everybody to be safe. So do obviously keep in mind the guidelines at the moment with the pandemic, staying at home, protecting the NHS, saving lives. I know it's difficult from our point of view in regards to inventories and keeping our business going, and we're going to be talking more about that. I'm trying to offer advice. We've got a free Facebook hub group, which is closed, but it's for all inventory professionals and clerks, so you can ask questions. We can give over as much information as possible, but the main thing is you keep safe, you keep your family safe, and just make sure that, you know, when we come out of this situation, when we go beyond the pandemic, we're already fighting fit and ready to go to take on the work that will be stockpiling. Because I know it is, because I'm talking to my clients and I know we've got work there waiting for us. So hopefully we'll all hit the ground running. So do be very careful, and I hope you stay safe. Deborah's asking, is everybody still working out of interest? Deborah, from my point of view, yes, but we're being very selective in what we're doing. We're being very careful with what we're doing, and we're only doing it because it's necessary, i.e. a tenant potentially might be made homeless because of where they are in the chain. It's a key worker, it's a must do, but we're keeping to the guidelines, and if we're at all unsure, then we're not taking on that work. But it's very minimal work at the moment, and my main focus is my clerk's safety and my safety as well. I'm not going to put anybody at risk. So bear that in mind. I know that's difficult from a clerk point of view, because obviously, you know, we're not really doing very much, and obviously we're used to being busy and working, but you know, your safety is paramount. So yes, I am, but being very, very careful. Right, so Andrew is saying no, as advised by Property Mark. Deborah is saying, yeah, that you just wanted to check. Again, it's about being safe, it's about being sensible, keeping to the guidelines. We can't do our work from home. Is it essential? There's arguments to say yes, there's arguments to say no, but certainly if I've got, like I have had, and I've said to a couple of people that I've been doing inventories for key workers, to me that's important. If it's just because someone's decided they want to move and they want to move now, etc., then no. And certainly looking at some other people, yeah, David, no. Yes, Phil, but only inventories and checkouts without the tenant present. Yes, absolutely. The protocols that I've got in place are non-tenant facing, zero contact, and that includes with the agent. All keys are put into envelopes, they're sanitised, they're put somewhere safe so the clerks can pick them up, drop them off without any contact. We're going in early, we're getting out early, so that again we're minimising potential contact. We're sanitising keys, hands, gloves, make sure we're wearing them, footwear, and then cleaning down when we leave, and just being very, very safe. Anything that over and above that, any way, shape or form we feel that we're not safe or not being compromised, we don't do it. End of. And yeah, definitely no handshakes during the inventory. Michelle, definitely not. Checkouts with tenants, no, totally no. Tenants are all told at the moment it's non-tenant facing. They've got to drop keys off and go for the safety protocol for keys, and that they'll be told or be given the report, share the report with the agent, and then via them. We also make sure that we tell them we are third party, we are separate contractors, not part of the agency, and that we're completely impartial, and to give them that confidence that when they leave, if they're not physically there, it won't matter. But also what we've done is we've now introduced self-service pre-checkout notes reports for tenants to use. So whereas normally we would have a conversation with the tenant face to face, you know, how are you, any issues to note, anything you need to make me aware of, etc. Tenants can't do that. Yes, they could leave a note in the property, they could send you an email, but we've now instigated an extra step in the reporting chain, where tenants can actually download a report, they can upload pictures, they can make comments, and that becomes a pre-checkout notes report, which we would then get as inventory clerks, the agent gets, and then when we go in to do the checkout, be it either then or a couple of weeks after the tenant left, depending on whether they were self-isolating, if there's any issues in regard to shielding or safeguarding. As part of the TDS guidelines, they've now allowed up to 4 weeks after the tenant's checked out to do the checkout report. So the pre-checkout notes really do make a lot of sense, so that they've got that opportunity to say there's a problem there or whatever, and making sure that that's all captured. Dan, you said, I've spoken to a few people who say they're just doing visual inspections only. Yeah, the trouble with that is you're not capturing information, and you've also got the issue that with those visual inspections, how are you then conveying that information? You know, are you evidencing it, etc. So it needs to be written down, and that's why we've done the pre-checkout notes, and then obviously do the checkout when it's safe to do so. Current guidance is 72 hours after the tenant has checked out, to make sure that any potential virus on any surface, like stainless steel, which apparently will keep the virus on it for at least 72 hours, you're beyond that and keeping safe. But then you should also be wearing gloves, end of, no exception, and then making sure you sanitize both prior to and after, and also the keys as well, so minimizing any touching, etc. I hope that's been really, really useful to you. I hope you found that interesting. If you do have any other questions, feel free to put them on the chat box and we'll make sure that we answer them. And again, like I said, stay safe. It is going to be nice this weekend. It's going to be very tempting to go out, but obviously I want to be able to talk to you guys again for the next webinar, and then when we get beyond this pandemic. So do stay safe, and I look forward to our next webinar, and we'll be giving you that information shortly. You should have already seen excuse me, I'm running, get my words tongue-tied. You should have already seen a notice saying that our next one will be about work streams, and I'll be co-presenting with Steve Rad, the Managing Director of InventoryBase. So that's a definite must-see if you've got loads of questions around work streams. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much, and have a great bank holiday weekend. Thank you.